Yeah. So when you come to these like leaders, to these organizations, and you're telling them you need to start in small steps, what would be these steps that they're taking other than we have the budget? What are we doing with it?
It's great. So the budget is a great first step.
That's a good start.
And it's a good start. And allocating at least one person to innovation, ideally two, maybe three, because I mean, you hear all this stuff about how it's hard to multitask. Like now try to imagine multitasking between like delivering today and envisioning what could the future could be. It's hard for anyone, so don't ask someone to do it. Allocate the budget, allocate a person, and then honestly like look at where you're at in terms of how you've been innovating. So for example, a lot of companies are very good at what I call core innovation, kind of improving what they're already doing, better, faster, cheaper. So if that's what you've always done, don't try to go to the other end of the spectrum and create something that has never existed before in the world. It's too much of a stretch. It's like, strapping on your tennis shoes and then saying, I'm just going to go run a marathon. Like, no, you're going to hurt yourself. So say, okay, we're really good at this core innovation. How can we do something adjacent? How could we maybe expand into a new market or serve a different type of customer? Or how could we sell our product in a different way? What's one step forward? And that's so important because if you can do that one step, it's going to feel like a huge step to the organization because it's so different, but it also proves that it can be done. And there's so much skepticism around whether a company can innovate. It's just like one of those flavor of the month things of like, oh yeah, management's talking about innovation again. Whereas if you get that even one step in, people are like, oh, we actually mean it and we can do it. And it starts to kind of build this momentum.
Yeah. So when is the point that these like two, three people trying to get it spread it out to the whole company or parts of the company because they have a plan, they want to elaborate something or whatever? How do they do it with other people within the organization and get them enthusiastic and interested and engaged in that?
Yeah, it's building a movement. There's this great TED video of how to build a movement, and if you haven't seen it, it's at this kind of outdoor festival concert, and everyone's sitting on the lawn watching, and there's one guy who's just dancing like
Yeah, I
crazy,
know this video. Yeah.
and everyone's kind of like, what is going on there? And the crazy person dancing, the lone nut, as they call it in the video, that's the
Low
innovation
nut.
team. The lone nut, that's the innovation team. And but then you get a second person who comes, and that's the follower, and the follower, as they say in the video, legitimizes the lone nut. And so the innovation team, and especially their sponsor, the executive kind of overseeing it, they need to find that second guy, the follower.
Yeah.
And there are people in every organization who want to innovate. They've been asking questions, they see the opportunity for something new, they just need an outlet for it. And so it's almost like if you're out there as the lone nut dancing away, they'll find you, and then you'll get the third person, and that's when the movement starts. But it's slow, and you have to be willing to look a little crazy for a little while.
Yeah. So let's say that you did that and you have these followers and you have lots of ideas, and some of them would be pitching their idea. So, what are the mistakes they should avoid if they pitch this innovative idea to, I don't know, to management, to the C level? I don't know who is like listening, but what do they need to do in order to make it successful for them?
Yeah. Oh, pitching an idea. I see so many people, especially in large companies, they get really excited about their ideas. And so they rush into the executive's office and it's like, we should do this. And okay, like what's next? And why should we do it? And why do you think we should do it? And there's all these questions that come up that in the enthusiasm of the person with the idea, they just want to share their idea. And unfortunately, what happens is that becomes a really nice conversation, but then nothing happens. And so it's, as I say, ideas are a dime a dozen, but, it's really about action and decisions. And so if you have a great idea, that you want to pitch, put yourself in the shoes of the person listening. And, yes, you have a great idea. Why is it a great idea? How does it align with the priorities and the strategies of the organization? What is needed to move forward? Not your grand vision. We're not going to put on tennis shoes and go run a marathon. What's the next step and what do you need in order to do that? And kind of thinking in these baby steps and laying out the path, so that the person you're pitching to, it feels reasonable, it feels responsible because it aligns with their goals, and it feels practical and doable without taking a huge risk. Because if you go into your boss's office or an executive's office, like, I have an idea, I need $10 million, you're never going to get
No.
that.
Yeah. I thought that you would say that these like innovation leaders who are the ones who are responsible to mitigate between what is the strategy, what is needed, where is the company going, and what you could do about it, and then like do this match. And then you have someone like explaining that to leadership, I guess. So what you're saying is like they could just do it if the executive is open for it, right? They could
Yep.
just do it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
present their idea. When I think about pitching, I usually work with lots of startups here in Israel, and pitching in the usual world, in the VC world, is like you're pitching to someone who is like a fund, like a venture capital, for example. And I guess it's a bit or a lot different when you're doing it within your company. First, people, they know you, and you're risking something that might sound stupid. And more that, like you want more than the money and the funding. You want them to trust you, and you maybe you've proven that you should be trusted. So the relationship here between the listener and the pitcher are so different, right?
Yeah, it's so different. And it's funny, it's in and I've heard this from friends who've gone through VC pitches, is that really what you want is a yes or a no. The kind of like the maybe, the send me more information, the check back in 3 months. It's kind of this terrible middle ground. And like you were saying, in a company, there's a relationship there. But more often than not, that leads to that horrible middle ground. Like, oh, okay, well, what about this? And maybe come back with more information, because the executive that you're pitching to, like, likes you and trusts you and doesn't want to be mean and doesn't want to crush your idea or crush your enthusiasm. So you end up in kind of this perpetual cycle of just more questions and not really making progress. So that's why it's so important to go in and say, like, look, I have a plan, and have an ask like entrepreneurs do. Like, I want you to, I want this kind of funding, and I'm going to do this with it. And it's a totally different conversation, because, we're not talking about ownership of the idea and stake, but you still got to go in with a plan and with an ask. Otherwise, it's just going to be endless questions.
And do you feel that most of the employees are really educated in order to do that? Like an entrepreneur, he has no other way because this is what he decided to do. So he needs to learn how to get funding. But I guess that if you're a manager in this specific domain, you're usually not pitching, and you're usually not thinking about the business plan if you're not in the business section of the company, so forth. And maybe you're from, from science part or whatever, from development, whatever. So how do you teach them to be more entrepreneurial, in a sense, just to create an idea and to go forth with it?
Yeah, and so much of it is, like you said, entrepreneurs, they they have no other choice. You have to figure this out. And there are resources out there, but like that pressure of like, I've got to figure it out now, is real. And in a company, you don't have that pressure, because you collect a paycheck whether somebody likes your idea or not. And so that's why so often I'll see people who have great ideas, and then they've shared them and nothing's come of it, and they get really demotivated and they get disengaged. And then you get into all of the stuff that you hear about, the great resignation, as it's being talked about in the US, of everybody leaving their jobs and finding new ones. And, it's because I think there is a mindset of, well, I'm an employee, So I can share an idea, but if someone doesn't like it, fine, I'll just go back to my job. Versus taking on that entrepreneurial mindset and saying, you know what, I'm a business owner. And, whether I define the business as me and my career, or I feel ownership for the business I'm working on, like I have to have that same drive and that same scrappiness and that, same figure it outedness, not a word, that an entrepreneur does, and hold myself to that standard. And again, some people, like, they have that inner drive. And so it's a matter of, kind of giving them permission to live it and
Yeah.
to unlock it. And other folks are going to say, well, that's great, but I also just kind of like my job and I like doing my job. And that's great too, because goodness knows you need people to operate the company. If everybody wanted to change it,
Yeah.
we can't all want to do the same thing, but giving permission and clearing the way for people who have that drive is so, so important.
Yeah. I know, like when I started with innovation after so many years in the tech industry in Israel, I didn't understand really the gap of we don't have like 100 years company in Israel because we're so much younger. But in general, just to understand that even if you're very innovative and very creative and you have, the grit, to do so, when you're in a certain position and you don't want to risk it in any way,
Mhm.
you maybe this huge company has the great talents and lots of money and they want to invest, but still they're lacking this, I know, mindset of people just going through that. And even if they get to know again and again and again, and they will get no in the beginning for sure,
Mhm.
they still stick to the plan to do something.
Yes. Yeah,
So
no,
this is,
it reminds me. So I started my career. I was in Procter and Gamble in brand management. I'm coming out of university. I'm in my young 20s, and like just all fight and motivation and all of that. And I was incredibly lucky that I was put on an innovation team when I joined P&G. And P&G hadn't really launched a new brand in decades at that point. So we were very entrepreneurial within P&G of figuring everything out. And so I didn't have all of this background and this experience or a mortgage or a family or any of these realities of life. And so I remember just going in kind of like bull in a china shop. What do we need to get done? Let's get it done. Don't worry about process. And I had a great time and broke a few things along the way. But at that time, I couldn't understand some of my other colleagues who were like, oh, well, no, you have to follow this process. I'm like, yeah, that'll take too long. We got to do this. And now that I am older and not in my 20s anymore, I can so empathize with those colleagues that I had. Like, oh, like I know how experience can kind of say, no, 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 play it a little safe. Just, follow the process. What's the difference between taking 4 weeks versus 2 weeks? And